July the 1st, 2026 was supposed to pass the way these anniversaries always do. A short line from the palace. A few flowers left by an aide. A quiet nod music to what would have been Princess Diana's 65th birthday. And then the royal machine moving on to whatever came next on the calendar. That is how the date has been handled almost every music year since 1997. This year it slipped out of that pattern because a 24-year-old great niece of the late Queen, a young woman most of the country would not recognize in a crowd, did something nobody had planned, nobody had cleared, and nobody in the press office knew was coming. And by that evening, it was the only story royal watchers could not stop turning over. This is not just a tender, it concerns how a family that has spent nearly 3 decades carefully managing Diana's memory is now watching one of its quietest members handle that memory entirely on her own terms. And it touches the question the monarchy has never really answered. Who actually gets to decide what Diana's legacy means? The institution that outlived her or the people who simply loved her? To understand why something so small landed the way it did, it helps to know why July 1st was on track to pass like every other overlooked anniversary. What Lady Margarita Armstrong-Jones actually did in the hours she was supposed to be somewhere else. How a young woman who never met Diana ended up holding a piece of her more directly than almost anyone left in the family. And why the people who know her say this quiet afternoon reaches back through 3 generations and forward into a question the palace would rather not sit with. Let me take you through it. Diana Frances Spencer was born on July the 1st, 1961 and died on August 31st, 1997 at 36 years old. For most of the 29 years since, her birthday has passed the same modest way. A brief statement from Kensington Palace, sometimes a photograph reissued from the archive, and little else. Royal commentator Ingrid Seward has noted that the family prefers to let the date pass with dignity rather than spectacle. Princess William and Harry have reunited to pay tribute to their late mother, unveiling a statue of Diana in the gardens of Kensington Palace. The one real exception was July 1st, 2021, Diana's 60th, when William and Harry stood together in the sunken garden at Kensington Palace to unveil a bronze statue of their mother, a rare moment of unity in a period when their bond was visibly fraying. Every July 1st since has felt smaller by comparison, which is part of why what happened this year caught so many people off guard. Lady Margarita Elizabeth Rose Elaine Armstrong-Jones was born on May 14, 2002, nearly 5 years after Diana was already gone. She never met her. She is the daughter of David Armstrong-Jones, the 2nd Earl of Snowdon, and through him the granddaughter of 2 people who sat at a strange intersection of the royal family and the world it usually kept at arm's length. Princess Margaret, the late Queen's younger sister, and Anthony Armstrong-Jones, the 1st Earl of Snowdon, better known simply as Lord Snowdon, one of the most celebrated portrait photographers Britain has ever produced. Margarita grew up drawn toward image and design rather than ceremony. She trained as a jewelry designer in Paris and works today as a photographer, which is to say she came up not just around her grandfather's pictures, but inside the same craft that made them. That lineage matters here more than it usually would, because in 1981, Lord Snowdon was the man chosen to take Diana's first official portraits, the sitting that introduced a shy 19-year-old newly engaged to Prince Charles to the world. Those early pictures of her, soft and years ahead of everything that would follow, were his, and they became part of the private inheritance of the family Margarita grew up inside. She never knew Diana, but she grew up surrounded by the way her grandfather had seen her. There is a second thread, quieter than the first. For years, Princess Margaret and Diana were neighbors at Kensington Palace, their apartments a short walk apart. Margarita's grandmother lived out her final years a few doors from the woman half the world would soon be mourning and died in February 2002, 3 months before Margarita was born. The granddaughter never knew either of them, and yet both are pressed into the same corner of Kensington she walks whenever she is there. At 24, Margarita sits around 28th in line to the throne, far enough down that she holds no official role and none of the working royal duties her cousins were raised into. She is not the kind of royal the public pictures when it thinks of the family on a balcony. She does no engagements and arranges no photographers around herself. She built a life in art and design instead, mostly outside the frame the monarchy stands in. The last person anyone expected to generate a royal headline. which is exactly what made the afternoon of July the 1st so unlike her. That is the young woman who, according to sources close to the family, quietly slipped away from a family lunch on the afternoon of July 1st. The first thing anyone noticed was that she was not there. Margarita had been expected at a small family gathering that afternoon, and she simply wasn't at it. A source told the Daily Mail she had asked days in advance to keep the afternoon of the 1st entirely free and had given no reason why. At the time, it meant nothing. Family diaries shift constantly, and a missing afternoon for someone 28th in line is not on its own a story worth chasing. But this was not just a gap in a diary. It was a deliberate private decision about how to spend a few hours nobody was watching. And what she did with them is the part that traveled. According to an account given to OK magazine by someone in Kensington Gardens that afternoon, Margarita arrived alone with no visible protection officers near her and walked to the sunken garden, the same spot where Diana's statue was unveiled 5 years before. She was not carrying flowers. She was carrying a single framed photograph. She set it down among the tributes at the base of the statue, stood with it for a long stretch without speaking to anyone, and then left the way she came. No statement, no official photographer, just a young woman returning a picture of someone she never met to the one place built to hold her memory. The detail that made it travel did not come from the palace. It came from the people who happened to be there. A visitor photographing the statue caught Margarita in the edge of the frame without realizing who she was and posted it online, where it was picked up first by Hello and then by half the tabloids in the country. It was another onlooker, someone who knew their royal photography, who noticed what the framed picture actually was. It was not a print from a gift shop. It was one of Lord Snowdon's own portraits of Diana, one her grandfather had taken at the very beginning when Diana was barely 20, younger than Margarita is now, carried back to her statue by his granddaughter on the day she would have turned 65. Royal commentator Robert Jobson called it the most quietly devastating tribute this family has produced in years, and noted how sharply it cut against the statement Kensington Palace put out that evening, 3 careful sentences that named Diana and no one else. Sources close to William say he was moved when he was told, in part because the gesture echoed something his mother used to do herself. Arrived somewhere unannounced without cameras arranged in advance because she wanted to be there, not because anyone told her to be. What makes this land so hard is the contrast sitting right at the center of it. On one side is the institution's way of remembering Diana. A press release, an archived photograph, a sentence signed off by 3 different people before it reaches the world. On the other is a 24-year-old who has spent her whole life outside the frame, choosing entirely on her own to step toward a woman she had no memory of, no bond with, and no obvious reason to mourn. She never met Diana. She was not raised on stories of her at bedtime, and she still went alone on a Wednesday afternoon. Nobody was watching, carrying a photograph her grandfather had taken. There is something circular in that image. Once you know where Margarita has been before, because there was one occasion years ago when she stood at the center of the most photographed royal moment of her generation. It was April 29, 2011. She was 8 years old, one of the bridesmaids at the wedding of Prince William and Catherine Middleton up on the Buckingham Palace balcony when the newlyweds kissed, and the crowd roared and hundreds of millions of people were watching around the world. For a few hours that day, a little girl who had asked for none of it was part of an image the entire planet saw. And then she stepped out of it, raised deliberately away from the spotlight her cousins were born into, and stayed there for the better part of 15 years. So a strange line runs through it. The child who once stood inside the most watched royal picture of her generation grew into a woman who makes pictures for a living and who chose on Diana's birthday to honor her through a photograph rather than a public word in the one way that guaranteed no camera was ever supposed to be there. That the most talked about royal moment of the week came from the family's most private young member entirely by accident, and without any of the usual machinery behind it, is not a small thing inside a household that has spent 30 years trying to control precisely this music kind of moment. It raises the quieter, more uncomfortable question underneath all of it. If the one who felt she had to go is the one nobody ever watches, what does that say about everyone who did not? What this means going forward is music, still unsettled. Diana's memory has belonged officially to the institution that outlived her, guarded and approved and issued in 3-sentence statements. But the people carrying it now are each a step further removed from ever having known her. And this year it was the most distant of them. A granddaughter of the woman who once lived next door, and the man who took her very first portraits, who reminded the country what it actually felt like to miss her. She brought back a picture. It said more than the statement did.